with that out of the way, yesterday I had mentioned that due to a travel challenge that we had, our special keynote speaker that we had from the United Kingdom had to be slotted in this morning, especially for you. So we have two keynote speeches this morning. We have our first keynote speech and the honor of having Mr. Liam Maxwell's presence all the way from the United Kingdom. And I think some of you know, we announced the 2016 e-government survey yesterday, which was focused on the different types of country initiatives around the world and those that are put together in an index by the United Nations on e-government. The United Kingdom was the most recently ranked as top country. So Mr. Liam Maxwell is the National Technology Advisor for the government in the United Kingdom, and he is specifically focused on effectiveness and efficiency of public services, using ICT, but also on development cooperation efforts for this purpose. So he works with different countries around the world as well to ensure that UK technologies are open source. So he will speak about these different points today, and I'd like to ask him to come to the podium for his first keynote speech. Please, a round of applause.
Hopefully that's now working and you can hear me. Good. Otherwise I'll just have to shout. Thank you very much. Thank you for having me. A day late, but it's good to be here and to talk with fellow civil servants about the changes that we've made and where we've got to. Can I just start with a bit of a short conversation about the challenge that we had in the UK. You will probably know after the financial crisis in 2008, we had a change of government in 2010, and when that government came into power, there was a significant challenge to us for our technology. And we were given these three requirements to meet, which was, the first thing was to try and build your services for your governments that actually worked for your citizens. We had spent many years trying to create a perfect e-government that replicated the forms and processes of a government online. And so we started to build our services around the user as opposed to around the government. And that was a fundamental cultural shift for the government. We needed to save money. We were spending approximately 1% of gross domestic product on the internal IT costs of government, which you can probably recognise is not something that's sustainable. And we discovered that there was only one other country that was spending more per head, and that was Switzerland. And they had a particle accelerator. So that was something we didn't have. And that was one of the reasons the costs for them were so high. So the other thing was, as a government, you can't move fast enough because you've always got a huge amount of coalition building and ambiguity to deal with, and most importantly, we had to change shape. So my first point to you today about the changes we made were that governments are built like this. Every government has a series of departments, and all of those departments work in a strange way together. There's a joke about the British civil service that it's 24 different departments, all at war with each other, but united by a common pension scheme. And there's some truth in this. But the main thing is, if you think about the business processes that we do across government, they need to work across government. And therefore you need to start thinking about how you provide services across the estate. And the way that we did this was we used open as our tool for doing this. We used the word open in four main areas to do this. Open source, open data, open standards, and open markets. So I'm just going to quickly touch on each of those to show you how, just by using that as your dynamic, you can start to change the way your government works. So in terms of open data, we're a member of the Open Government Partnership, the Open Data Institute is a British organisation. It started there, it's now got nodes around the world. But we publish the data about what our services are doing, principally so that we can see what's happening and we can produce a culture, which means that we're open about what is going on in the service, how many people use it, where is it working, where is it not working, so that we can make it better. There's no right or wrong in this. Our aim is to make these things better. And so we publish the data, fairly exhaustive data about how our services are working and the satisfaction rates. This is all at a site called gov.uk/performance. We use open source code. Now there are two big reasons for this. Number one is we started using open source because it was quicker. As we started to change our government very quickly, we needed to build things quickly, and it would take us too long to procure massive amounts of proprietary software. So we started to build everything in the open. But also we build in open source because we know that we don't have a monopoly on getting it right, and that by collaborating with other governments, we can actually share our solutions. I'll go into this in a little bit later. If you're going to build a government on the internet, you need to be able to share resources. If you need to share resources, you have to have a set of standards. So we committed to open standards, and we've changed quite a lot of the tech market by saying we will work with open standards. The most contentious one we went for was open document format, but then we've just signed off another set of standards where we are using common standards across our public sector, which we adopt from the public sector and from industry. We do not feel that the government should create standards. We feel that we should use the standards that are there and that they should be open. And then open markets. We were buying all of our huge amount of IT, we were buying from about 12 companies. And this didn't make any sense. So we had to open up our market, not just to help us have more effective tech and to buy innovation. It was also so that we could start to stimulate our digital economy and start to grow a discipline. We have fintech, there's medtech. In the UK, there's now actually quite a coherent GovTech market of companies that provide new innovative solutions to government. In order to do that, you have to get through the main barriers to any change in government. In tech, these were the 4 barriers we identified. I call this the square of despair. So this is procurement. We had to open up our procurement to small businesses. Security. We had to make sure that if we were going to deliver services on the internet, we had the right level of security. Previously, we were trying to do everything internally, using security solutions that were developed in the Cold War. We've now moved to a much more open and permissive set of security establishments, but it also means that we have very strong security within the government and a National Cybersecurity Centre to help us. Capability, we had to hire in about 200 people to come and start the work. We've now hired in more than 2,000 people have come into the government in development roles, so that we have people within government who have come in to work in this space. Importantly, we also have a lot of people in that 2,000 who come in and go out, and come back in and go out again. Working in government is something you do as you would work in other industries. You can change in and out. It's really important that we give that flexibility. And then legacy. Everybody with any reform will encounter legacy. We have resolved that by creating our own legacy off-ramp for old solutions, which is it's a government company which takes the old solutions in a joint venture with another company and retires them, takes them away to die, essentially. We call that our Hotel California for government IT. You can check into it, but you can never leave. What it means is that you can deal with the legacy and then get on with building your technology and your new technology in the cloud at 100th of the price. And so we started to start building multi-source components. Instead of buying big, siloed outsources, we would buy small components of technology from smaller providers. And that's where the open standards, the open source, and the open market came into play. And this is the effect it had on our industry. That we moved from a very small supply chain, where the supply chain was in charge of us, to a diverse supply chain where we're in charge of them, but also we are able to work with companies who come to us with innovative solutions. And it means that we can buy in innovation quickly, effectively, and also, crucially, grow jobs, so that we can grow skills and capability in our industrial base. And a lot of the companies that we work with now are starting to grow themselves in the GovTech market. We also relied a lot on cooperation, so this was the D5. We found a group of 5 countries where we all found ourselves at the same levels of development in this space. Estonia, Israel, UK, New Zealand, and Korea. a lot of the things that I've described about having an open market, we found in Korea had already got there. So we found ourselves with countries where we could work together and help share experiences so that we could move along. But we also share not just our experiences, but our code and our approaches to software. Because as a government, we don't have a monopoly anywhere outside the UK. We do not compete with any of your governments because you have the monopoly in your country. We're not competitors. We issue driving licenses. Other governments issue driving licenses. We do exactly the same thing, and yet we've all gone off and developed our own version of this. And that's what's led to a huge amount of waste and also duplication across government. So one of the things we did as the D5 was started to share our code and our services. If you go to the Gov.uk website, it's a pretty distinctive site. It's got a clear design. It was designed in the open. If you go to the New Zealand government website or the Israeli government website, it looks quite like the British government website. And there's a reason for that, because it is. There's no reason we shouldn't share and join together to make our services more effective by actually borrowing and using each other's code. This was the whole reason around developing open source solutions, was that as a government we don't compete. And so the way that we start to build services is going to start to look a lot like this now. The platform as a service layer within the IT infrastructure means that you can abstract a lot of that. Essentially, the easiest way of describing that is that since 2013 we've had a cloud-first strategy. We presume that you will build all your services on the cloud, on the public cloud, unless you can come up with a very compelling reason why not. And that's the strategy we've deployed. We've saved billions of pounds doing that. Literally £3 billion for 2 years, £2 billion we've just identified again as savings from moving to the public cloud whilst maintaining effective security. There really is no excuse for building your own data centres. There really is no reason for a government to have its own data centres these days for any of the public services. For the secret stuff and for top secret stuff, there is. And for public services, no. And the savings there are enormous. We should consolidate our registers so that we only have one list of particular things. We found we had 15 different lists of universities, which makes it very difficult to work out which university is which. We had 25 lists, I think, of countries. So the first thing we did was we decided what a country was and then created a government list of countries as a register. But we will move more and more to having coherent registers of data. And then there are open source components which we built and which other governments have built, which we can put together so that people can start to use them effectively, quickly, and above all, knowing that they've been tried somewhere else before. And then people can contribute back to us services or the changes that they want to have, and we get a much better piece of software. And then governments can start to focus on the service delivery aims that are most important to their citizens, which are designing services around the user, continuous development, and the ability to change and build your software and your services so that it works for the users of your software and the users of your web services. And we're finding that this paradigm gives us an order of magnitude or 2 orders of magnitude saving in the services we produce. Now, I said at the beginning, we were spending so much on IT, it was difficult to think of anybody who could spend more. But if you think about it, we're saving, in some cases now, in terms of just in terms of moving our hosting, we're saving 94–95% of what we're doing. And all of that money can go back into the frontline services for the departments that work with it to deliver better public services, to remove the administrative cost and move into much better public service delivery. And that's one of the reasons we were very interested in talking with you and Dessa, because this is something we can share with every country, because it's part of the open source movement. Open source government actually allows countries to move faster, quicker, and more effectively. And so that's why I thought it was important we came and had a talk. And I'm sorry you missed me yesterday. I did but I hope that's given you some information about the approach we're taking now within the UK and within the D5 movement. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Liam, and I'm very happy we could still have you today because open government and open source and the efficiency and effectiveness of public service is really central to government accountability as well. We know that with more open government, we can have increases in accountability and improve the delivery of our services. So with this, I'd also like to note that we have a second honor today to have a special keynote from Dr. Agus Joko Pramono, who is the board member of the Audit Board of the Republic of Indonesia. So I'd like to call him to the podium as well. Thank you.
Good morning. It is an honor for me to be here. We would like to share our experience as the Audit Board of the Republic of Indonesia. I am one of the board members of the Audit Board of the Republic of Indonesia. We are supreme audit institutions in Republic of Indonesia as your country's supreme audit institutions. That's why we would like to have a discussion about the audit model of Indonesian Supreme Audit Institution, Indonesian side, and from the whole government to the whole of society approach. What will SAI do? What will Supreme Audit Institution in your country do? Usually, we will talk about this kind of thing in one semester, but I only have 8 minutes to discuss these things. So we'll start about the mandate of the SAIs. Every SAI in each country has different mandates. As a background, I would like to explain the position of Supreme Audit Institution in Indonesia. In the constitutions, we are Supreme Audit Institution. We have the same level of the positions with the House of Representatives and the Supreme Court and the Supreme Audit and the government themselves. So we audit all of the government entities, all of the government bodies, and we also audit the Supreme Court. We also audit the House of Representatives. That's why in conducting audit, we also audit the financial matters, the performance matter, and special audit matters. That's why we can easily move to the whole government approach, because usually when we audit a government institution, we audit only one single government bodies. But in this SDGs model, because all of government entity working together and they have the same criteria, the same objection, and they have several kind of common programs. So we have to have this different perspective in audit models. We audit the whole government approach. They don't have the single entities. We just audit all of the governments with some kind of performance approach. In each audit model, actually auditors come with this paradigm in each country. In general, the audit paradigm of SAI of Indonesia, it's involved the activities to get the fact and try to find the gap that exists between the fact and the criteria. The fact is present conditions, what is actually happens substantially, and we try to make the criteria, which is the best practices, regulations, or anything. And if we find the gap between the fact and the criteria, we call it findings. And we try to elaborate what the causes of the findings and what is the effect, and we give the government recommendations, and we give information to the government's conclusions about what we saw in our audit. We hope that our recommendations and our conclusions that will eliminate the causes. In SDGs model, it's a little bit more deep in audit process, because SDGs contains of widespread criteria and also widespread targets, and there is no single entity to produce the outcome. It should be cooperative of all the government bodies. That's why when we try to talk to the president said that I will take lead for the SDGs. So after several years of conversation with the presidents, then in 2017, the President of Republic Indonesia made the presidential decree. It concerning directly about SDGs implementation in Indonesia. And then the President himself led the SDGs implementations. So the Presidents gather the ministry. It is also the Ministry of Finance, the Ministry of National Development and Planning, and almost all of the ministries. They involved in this implementation of the presidential decree. It is presidential decree number 59, 2017, and it is stated in July 2017. It is 6 months ago. And as presented before by the government of Indonesia in this meeting, there have been significant actions taken in Indonesia for implementing SDGs. Presidential decrees was launched, established as legal binding institutional arrangement for the achievement of the SDGs implementation in Indonesia. Second, the effort of the align the mean of implementations of SDGs initiative with the medium-term development plan 2014 and 2019 has been started, and it involved all of the 94 selected targets out of the 169 SDGs target, which become the priority of the Indonesian government. And as we know that the SDG is not only involving the government, it's also involving the public and also philanthropy. And as you see in Indonesian milestones, in 2015 we already made several kind of action. 2016 and 2017 presidential decrees already made, and we hope that in 2030 we will achieve a certain target for the SDGs criteria. And also we try to achieve several things that we already working out right now. And as you see that Indonesian side, Indonesian Supreme Audit Institution known as BPK, is also the member of the INCOSAI, INCOSAI Congress, International Organizations of Supreme Audit Institution Congress. All of sides all over the world already have meetings in Abu Dhabi 2016. At December 2016, we already agreed that in 2017 to 2019, we will have some kind of specific approach that we will audit the SDGs implementations in all over the world. So we call it 4 approaches. We call it 4 approaches, which are, first approach, we will assess the SDGs preparedness in each government's institutions. We will assess. There were several question and answer. There were several surveys, and we assess the readiness of the government to implement the SDGs. And second, we will undertaking the performance audit that examine the economy, efficiency, and effectiveness of the key government programs that contribute to the specific aspect of the SDGs. And the third approach is assessing and supporting the implementation of the SDGs 16, which relates in part to effective, accountable, and transparent institutions. And the fourth approach is being the models. We would like to have SAI in each country being a models of accountability in their own operations. So that we would like to have these all agreements implemented in 2017 and until 2019. What is already SAI Indonesian do for the SDGs model? We have already checked the government preparations. SAI Indonesia has prepared integrated audit framework in order to assess the accountability of the government of Indonesia and also SDG preparedness in the national level. For the audit board around the world, some responsibility, and I might state the large responsibility falls upon their shoulders to support national effort toward the SDGs. And also, Indonesian SAI already made the websites. It gathered all of the information from the Statistical Bureau and the Ministry of Finance and the Ministry of National Development and Planning. And what next, we would like to make the mobile apps for doing so. And in closing, I hope that our knowledge sharing in the symposium will result in fruitful discussion and full range of constructive contribution. Thank you very much for your attention.
And with this, I'd like to announce Mr. Chae-gun Chung, who's the head of the UN Project Office on Governance, who will lead us in our discussion in this plenary on accountability and SDG implementation. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Liam Maxwell. Your brilliant keynote speech. Even this session started, but I think it would be better ask some question to Liam, and then we'll have the panel's presentation and then discuss. Mr. Liam, could you? Yeah. Any question to Mr. Liam Maxwell's presentation about ICT and open government? Could you deliver the microphone?
We can all talk. I think enough of us here that we can just talk.
Yeah, thank you for an excellent presentation. I had a question. The first slide that you had, where you talked about trying to look at it from the point of the user.
Yeah.
So you said based on users' needs. Now, how did you determine those needs?
So that's a really important question. So, and there's a bit of English involved in this as well, because what the user
I don't
wants.
know whether you want to go on the mic.
One of the differences you have is what the user. There is a difference between what the user wants and what the user needs. So we spend a lot of time with our users, talking to them about what they want and what they need to do. And we have user research labs, and we have user engagement laboratories where you try out software and try out tools with them, and spend a lot of time researching the user's interaction with the business process, much more before you start doing anything and cutting any code. And that's a very interesting thing to start to work with, because then as you go through building the software, you try the software out with some users, and then identify what's working and what isn't. And that's done, principally we do that in a two-room situation, where the user is in the room, there's a video camera, and the developers are sitting in the other room. So they're getting the completely unvarnished, uncensored view of what the people think about the software and how it's working. And continually using that in our development means that the software becomes much more closely aligned to the user need. But in order to do that, you need to be able to flex the build and flex the design as you're using it with them.
So who determines eventually what is the actual need? You differentiate it between what the user wants, which is what the user would say, and then you come up with what the user needs. So how do you make this transition, and who determines?
Because you work out what is the most effective data. The data we get shows us the most effective use of the service. So you can see what people are using through the site. So that performance platform, underneath it, there's a view of how far people are going through a site, what they're using, what they're not using. And then the satisfaction rating at the end helps us identify whether this has met their need.
Okay, thank you. Any other? Oh, okay. Yeah.
Thank you very much, William, for that excellent presentation. In terms of e-gov Bhutan, we are actually about to embark on a big e-gov plan, and I just realized that what you present actually represents a great opportunity, because we are exactly able to do what you said we shouldn't do, which is procure expensive software, very silo-based, and not take advantage of the fact that governments, irrespective, we do similar things from driving license, so on and so forth. So I was interested in a bit more detail about the opportunity you presented to access what you have and the cooperation you mentioned with BMDESA. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, I think it's really important to, when you ask a citizen what their view is of the government and whether it's the Department of Finance or the Department of Pensions or who's giving the service, most citizens don't care. It's the government. So that's the thing, that's where the platform approach becomes a core component. In terms of cooperation, we have started to begin with by making sure that all of our code is open, it's in GitHub. So you can access it there. But in addition to that, all of our tradecraft and methodology is published. So the digital by default service standard and the technology manual, we wrote the CTO's manual for CTOs, the service standard, the technology code of practice, all of our know-how is published online and available under a Creative Commons license. And the thing that, as I was explaining to Marion earlier, the thing we are now moving to is how can we then help people use these services themselves. And so we are looking at the moment, for the next 3 months, we're going to be building a unit or planning the build of a unit which will help governments do this. If you're about to start your program, it would be worth having a conversation with you before you start to go and procure your way out of trouble.
Thank you.
Because nobody ever procures their way out of trouble.
My name is Samuel from Nauru. Thank you for your presentation. I think I have 2 questions. Just to follow up on my colleague at this table, is after about the committee or services being open. I'm just wondering whether if the user, because it's all about accountability too. So when you said open, it doesn't mean that it's accountable, transparency. It's available link, it's there. What I'm trying to say is that as part of the key stakeholders, are the user part of the key stakeholders in making the decision making, and what things to be done, or what software to be adapted to? And my other question is regarding the D5. What is the linkage or the relevance of the 5 countries you mentioned? And are you thinking of expanding it, maybe to G77, something like that? Thank you.
So on your first question, on your second question about D5, we found ourselves, I think would be the way of describing it, that we convened a bunch of governments and we found that we were at similar stages of development and we worked in a similar way. The D5 will expand at some point. And there's a set of criteria, and it's an aspirational group. The whole point is that if you start to use the same things and the same components, then you can join, and that's one of the things we've been talking about this week. Our next meeting is in New Zealand in February. I would keep an eye out for the announcements there, would be my description. In terms of, so it's an inclusive group. We'd like it to become bigger. With the way that decisions are made in terms of users and how we do it, the user design is the most important process that we're following. And so the users do have a very strong impact on how you can design and build a service. And the discipline of user design is really at the heart of, in fact, what those 5 governments do, that we use. And a lot of that is about spending very large amounts of time with citizens, before you start to build anything, actually walking through the processes. A lot of it's done just using cards on walls, just helping people identify what they need to do, and then being able to be flexible to change the services as people say, that works for me, that doesn't work for me. It's quite different from major population survey research or popularity polls. It's very much about helping people identify how the business process works for them. There's a really excellent example of someone who does this really well, it's very well published, called Lisa Reichelt. And if you could bottle Lisa and have her around the world, it would be amazing, the change she would have on the relationship between citizens and their state. But ultimately, the government has also to say to its citizens, this is a service for you, and we make it open for you. Just the last point on openness. All of this came from our starting to publish and be open about what we did. When we published the cost per transaction for every transaction in government, we publish all of the spending in government, we publish huge amounts of data around government, not just for democracy reasons, but actually because it pulls in great information for us on what works and what doesn't.
Okay, thank you. Okay, thank you, Mr. Maxwell. Already we have the keynote speech about this session from Dr. Aguas Joto from Mano. We are running out of time. We only have 40 minutes for our session, so I think it would be better I do not introduce an objectives about this session, because we have two sessions in the morning. One is the review at the national level, and following session is the review at the global level. So at the global level, Director Marion will moderate. So I happily leave the introduce of the session and key messages to Marion. Now I just start introduce the panel. We have 3 panels, so I'll give you just 10 minutes. So the first, I'd like to introduce Mr. Sabur Choudhury, Honorary President Inter-Parliamentary Union, IPU, and Member of Parliament, Bangladesh. Please up the front, and after delivering your presentation, please sit down. Have a seat.
A very good morning. I'll go straight to my presentation because we are running very tight on time. As you can see, this is the Global Parliamentary Report, which was a joint effort of the Inter-Parliamentary Union and the UNDP. The relationship between the two organizations is growing. Those of you who are familiar with the UN Charter, it begins with the words, "We the peoples." And of course, parliamentarians, by virtue of the fact that they represent the people, so there is a very common affinity between the two. The first report was in fact done in 2012, so it's a joint collaboration. And this first report was trying to look at the relationship between parliamentarians and citizens that they represent. And what are the expectations of citizens? This is of course a very valid question, relevant question even today. So then we moved on 5 years later to this new report that has just been launched. And in this one, we were looking at oversight. And this is basically, oversight is the parliamentary term, and it essentially refers to Parliament's ability, Parliament's mandate to hold the government and the executive to account. So this is what this report is about. And what I think I should point out is that the report is actually based over interviews and studies that have been conducted over a period of 2 years. 150 national parliaments have been involved in this process. So it isn't something which is based on theory. This is actually what came out. And what I want to do is to quickly run through the main findings of that report. So the purpose of the report, why did we do this report on oversight, which is something very important. And you will remember that on the opening day, I talked about what sets parliaments apart from other stakeholders. So you have the private sector, you have civil society organizations, you have non-government organizations, NGOs, think tanks, academia. What sets parliaments apart is the fact that it has the mandate, the political and constitutional mandate to oversee the work of the government on behalf of the people. So this, I think, is a very important point. And the purpose is, one, we wanted to see how is accountability and oversight is performed by parliamentarians globally. There are then some recommendations for parliamentarians, and you will see parties, government, and civil society. Because this is not just a report for parliamentarians, it is also a report for civil society and other organizations who can work through the institution of parliaments as well as members of parliament to hold governments to account. And then, of course, the other thing is through the report, we wanted this to be a catalyst, something that's going to facilitate more action on this particular issue. Now, why is oversight important? I think earlier Liam was talking about trying to build on the basis of people's needs. So aspirations of people are very, very important. So I think the first point is it responds to the expectations of the people. So oversight, holding governments to account is important from that point of view. And of course, the moment you talk about aspirations of the people, then immediately you go on to the Sustainable Development Goals and Agenda 2030. And as we have been talking over the last 3 days, the central focus on that is people. So from aspirations, you go on to the SDGs. And then it is also a marker for relevance of parliaments in this current century. So oversight, through oversight, we differentiate ourselves from all the other work that is going on. And then you again look at the other direct benefits that you have from improved accountability, improved oversight, and these are fairly clearly laid out. One is it enables you to improve your policy. Through the oversight process, you can find out if there are any policy gaps. How can the policy be fine-tuned? How can it be made better? How can it be made more relevant? And so from that, you go on to gaps in legislation. I know when we talk about laws, there is a tendency to talk about new laws, and we don't often look at existing laws and try and see how those laws can be made more relevant. So gaps in policy and legislation, and of course that gives you value for money, which is what the people want. The next is improved processes, because if the process is better, if it is more transparent, then you get transparent government and you have less corruption, less wastage. So this is another important point. And of course, democracy without oversight is pretty meaningless. Either the state becomes too powerful or it becomes too weak, whichever way you look at it. And then there's a quote here which I think is very interesting, and it's from Baroness Gloria Hooper, member of the House of Lords. The important thing is to put government under pressure. Even if it is your own party that is in government. That is something very, very important. Because as I will talk about in a later slide, if you belong to the government party as a member of parliament, you find that you don't want to put the government to pressure because you don't want to embarrass them, you don't want to embarrass your party. But so this is something which is very, very important because unless you do it, it is not going to work. So it is essentially a political exercise. That's the point. Now, who is responsible for oversight? Yes, all parliamentarians will tell you, yes, we are responsible. But when you then look into the government members of parliament and then you look at the opposition, the answers are different. The government MPs didn't feel that for them oversight was that as important as that of an opposition member who felt that they had to do more in terms of holding the government to account. So this is just carrying out the survey results as you have. Now this, of course, is an important part that came through, the political space for oversight. One of the mechanisms that we have within the Interparliamentary Union is the Committee on Human Rights of Parliamentarians. Yes, we also have a committee for human rights of parliamentarians because we feel that unless you're able to defend the human rights of human rights defenders, then the whole issue of human rights becomes questionable. So, and there we find that, currently we have 459 MPs in 42 countries whose human rights have been violated. So if the MPs don't have that freedom, if they don't have that comfort level that they can carry out this oversight, then the extent to which they are able to carry that out is always going to be compromised. And you see that the opposition party, in fact, accounts for a very large number. I mean, it's 326 opposition party MPs who have had their human rights violated. So oversight requires capacity. I know we come back to the whole issue of capacity, and UNDESA is also looking at it. How do you enhance the capacity of parliamentarians? And it goes back to the issue of parliaments being fit for purpose, something that I talked about on the very first day. So capacity is very important, and it remains an aspiration in many parliaments. This is just talking about the enabling environment. Because of being short of time, I don't want to go through, but you can see the culture, the processes, the relationship, and the MPs at the end of it. This slide goes back to the presentation that we just had from Indonesia on the Supreme Audit Institutions. You see, when you're carrying out oversight, it is not possible for Parliament to work alone. It has to have a network. It has to reach out to other actors. Some of them are formal, like the National Human Rights institutions, the Supreme Audit institutions. So you need to have a very close nexus. So those are what we refer to as a formal, and then the informal would be the stakeholders, civil society, citizens consultations. So you need to have a broad spectrum, and parliamentarians by themselves cannot carry out this task. And I think that is an important message from the report that we wish to share. Oversight requires personal commitment, and it's an interesting quote: a parliamentarian who is not curious is a curious parliamentarian. So, you know, you have to ask questions. And I think the very fact that you're willing to ask a question, the very fact that a government servant or a government ministry knows that they are going to be held accountable, immediately brings about a change in their mindset, because they know that questions are going to be asked. And so that is accountability being practiced and enforced. Why is oversight difficult? And there we have listed some of the challenges, as you can see. The political environment, political party considerations. You know, I don't want to embarrass the government. I don't want to embarrass a minister who I am quite friendly with. He's from my own political party. So these are, of course, challenges that we as parliamentarians face. And I think these are very, very important challenges. So one is, of course, the other aspect is the resources, because you don't have the resources, you don't have the expertise, you don't have the funding. So that is also a very, very important consideration. And of course, the commitment of the MPs, because if that commitment is not there, then you're not going to be inclined to hold the government to account. This is again an issue of incentives and motivations. I know these PowerPoint presentations are going to be made available, so I don't want to go through the whole thing, but this is a summary of what the report had actually come up with in terms of the work of the MPs. I mentioned earlier that MPs generally felt in this report that what differentiates them from other stakeholders is their ability to hold governments to account. So it is the oversight which differentiates as a marker for Parliament's relevance in the current century. Oversight and SDGs. Of course, having the SDGs aligned, or having your national policies aligned with the SDGs, we have had a number of presentations on that. So this is something that certainly comes into play. Assessing Parliament's preparedness for SDGs. Remember, if you may remember, on the opening day, I was talking about a self-assessment toolkit that has been developed. So trying to see to what extent parliaments are geared, to what extent they are capable, where they are falling short, where they need to concentrate more. So this is also there. And of course, oversight of national progress reports on the SDGs. Okay, Parliament's own accountability. I know this is a question which is not asked very often, because parliaments are the institutions that holds governments to account. But what about the work parliaments themselves do? Is there any review? Is there any assessment as to whether this work is up to scratch? And 41% in fact responded that they have reviewed their oversight performance over the last 5 years. We in the IPU want this to be a much more regular process, because those who are holding others to account must also themselves review their ability to hold others to account. So this is a very important role. Parliaments doing their own critical reviews. Main findings: parliamentary oversight will continue to be a very, very important part of the work of the parliaments. Just very briefly, if I am to summarize what are the main tasks of parliament, you already know this. One is legislation, one is the budget, one is of course the representation, and last but not least, it is oversight and holding governments to account. So this continues to be an established mandate in a system of checks and balances. This is of course a very, very important part of the work that we do. The most MPs express commitment to oversight, but in practice, because of capacity issues, often limit their engagement in oversight activities. So, parliaments have to perform better. MPs have to perform better. This is what we are getting through this report. And then, of course, the relevance of parliaments in terms of the 21st century and oversight being an important issue. Those are the main findings. If there are some questions, I'll be happy to take them. I know time is constrained, so I've rushed through this, but I'm sure, Sarah, you will make sure that the PowerPoints are available to everyone. Thank you very much.
Thank you. It well showed us the importance of the parliamentary oversight, challenges in oversight, and the relation with the Sustainable Development Goals implementation. Thank you again. And now I'd like to invite Mr. Young Tae-young, the Mayor of Suwon City, to the podium. He will deliver about Suwon City's case of Sustainable Development Goal implementation and reviewing, setting a reviewing system. You have 10 minutes? Yeah, okay, thank you.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. I am Young Tae-young, Mayor of Suwon. I am very pleased to meet all the distinguished guests from home and abroad. In my presentation, I will introduce to you Suwon's best practice for local implementation of SDGs. Think globally and act locally. Under this slogan, all UN member states have promoted local sustainability after Agenda 21 was adopted at the Rio Summit in 1992. In Korea, civil societies asked local governments to draft a local Agenda 21, and people got to be more aware of sustainable development. So civil society proposed that the city government should establish a community to draft and implement local Agenda 21. In 1997, Suwon City government accepted this proposal and established Suwon Agenda 21 Committee. And in 1998, the Suwon Agenda 21 Committee announced the Hope Suwon 21, the first Suwon Agenda, which covered all areas of sustainable development. Hope Suwon 21 implemented various projects with the participation of citizens, local government, and businesses. At that time, I worked for Suwon Agenda 21 community. I was in charge of drafting Suwon Agenda 21. Since I took office as Mayor of Suwon in 2010, I strive to incorporate sustainable development into every aspects of city administration. As part of this effort, we declared Suwon as the environmental capital of Korea in 2011. Suwon set the most ambitious target in Korea to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 40% by 2030, below 2005 levels. And we have carried out various policies to meet this target. Suwon has implemented the community development project. Under this project, we involved the community spirit by encouraging residents to solve the problem of their communities by themselves. Also, we have been implementing the solar sharing power plant project. So city government and civic groups have built solar power plants on the rooftops of public buildings. And the profit are used for building more solar sharing power plants and for running energy welfare programs. Another public-private project includes rain city project. We collect rainwater, recycle them to improve water independency ratio. Have you heard of Eco-Mobility World Festival Suwon 2013? For your information, eco-mobility means eco-friendly transportation modes, such as walking, bicycle, bus, and tram. Suwon hosted the Eco-Mobility World Festival in 2013 for the first time in the world. During the festival, the residents in the pilot area lived without their cars for an entire month. The festival showed the world that we can live a happy life without fossil fuels and that we should give street back to people through car-free street. Since the first festival was held in Suwon, the second festival was held in Johannesburg, South Africa, and the third festival was held in Kaohsiung, Taiwan, and more cities are joining this movement. I'm sorry, I had 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development was adopted at the UN Sustainable Development Summit in September 2015. In the last 1 year, Suwon City Government wrote the draft for Suwon SDGs together with the Sustainable Development Council. We organized subcommittees in economy, society, and environment by engaging citizens, administration, and businesses as committee members. We conducted surveys on citizens, received advice from experts, and held 300 citizens roundtable discussion. As a result, we could complete the final first one SDGs with citizens. In November this year, we held a ceremony to announce the public-private joint declaration for Suwon 2030 SDGs. Suwon City 2030 SDGs is truly meaningful because it is the first SDGs in Korea led by citizens, and it is tailored to the local conditions of Suwon. This book contains Suwon SDGs we made this year. It contains of 3 areas, 10 objectives, 57 tasks, and 133 indicators. We enacted the Local Government Act on Sustainable Development in October this year to provide a legal basis for sustainable development. Starting from 2018, Suwon City will set up a system to effectively implement Suwon 2030 SDGs. To that end, we will establish a task force for sustainable development inside the city government. In addition, we will operate a Sustainable Development Council, which is a public-private government body. The council members will assess and monitor towards sustainability every year and raise citizens' awareness about sustainable development. As a mayor of Suwon, I'd like to make some suggestions on how to implement SDGs responsibly at the national level. First of all, we need to reorganize the national law on sustainable development while increasing the engagement of citizens and promoting communication and cooperation between local governments and citizens. Second, we should establish an objective data system for sustainable development and share them with other local governments. Last but not least, local action are the most important in realizing SDGs at national level. I hope that the international community like UN and the central government will come up with policy so that local actions and implementation can be spread further. This concludes my presentation on Suwon best practice for local implementation of SDGs. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Suwon City is one of the largest cities next to Seoul metropolitan area, and Mr. Mayor every day building the governance system because before he joined the government mayor, the city mayor, he was the very proactive NGO leaders. So I think there are many cities in Korea, but Suwon City actually mainstreamed already SDG goals into its city plan, and now governing body for reviewing with the citizens. So I think it's best practices to introduce the local and national level to reviewing and implementing the sustainable development goals. Thank you very much again. Okay, next, I'd like to invite Ms. Walchow Ritter, founder and principal, Knowledge Dialogue, to the podium.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, this session is called Looking at SDG Implementation at the National Level. And I was wondering why I'm on this panel, because Hong Kong is not a nation, as you all know, and Hong Kong is neither a city. So what is Hong Kong actually? What's happening here? So we are not a nation and we are not a city, but we are a special administrative region. So what is that? That maybe sounds quite interesting, and I think a lot of political scientists and constitutional legal scholars have a great pleasure in exploring what this means. And it's actually, we are a special administrative region of China. And it means that we have an autonomy, and we have a lot of discussion in our community whether this autonomy is high or low or decreasing. That's our big discussion in the city. So it's kind of very interesting, what is our say on SDGs? Is Hong Kong defining the SDGs for this region, or are we waiting for Beijing to tell us what to do? So that's a little bit kind of the situation in this field. Hong Kong has 7.345 million people and is very densely populated, as you all know, and as everybody knows this picture of Hong Kong. But on the other hand, 3/4 of our land is actually country parks, protected country parks. That's maybe something for those who have not been to Hong Kong. It's very surprising that we have so much of our space. 3/4 is actually untouched country parks. So that means biodiversity and protection of this environment is very high on the agenda. Okay, so the Special Administrative Region came about through the Sino British Agreement in 1984, and in 1997 Hong Kong returned to the motherland, to China. And so at the moment, what are our powers in terms of SDG? Well, we have, and Hong Kong still has a high degree of autonomy when it comes to expression of freedom of expression, civil rights, and rule of law, and it means we determine a lot of things for our own region, but we don't discuss national issues. I mean, national in the sense of Greater China issues. So for the SDG, under this one country, two system, what can we do? And so that's most of the surprising finding for me was actually that we have a lot of activities on SDG, but they are spread across different government agencies, but not really at the moment at the highest level in the government. That means at our chief executive office. And the most active agency in SDG implementation is actually the Planning Institute, the Planning Department. And but before I talk more about the Planning Department, I want to mention that Hong Kong is, I found that Hong Kong is very active in hosting UN events and talking about individual SDGs. Just this year, there were like more than 10 UN-related events on SDGs hosted by the universities. For instance, this is a conference by UNCTAD on the SDG number 14, and then we have conferences on SDG on the health-related. So we have a very active scholarly community looking at SDG, but the academic community is not the government. Okay, so and so coming back to the planning department. So the planning department is basically the agency that plans the physical environment and the long-term development of the city. So this is a tangible infrastructure of where is Hong Kong in 2030 and 2030 plus. And that means that in this report, a lot of reference is made to SDG 11, because that is all about the city and the space and so on. And what I find interesting is that it's called 2030 plus. The plus is new, and the plus means engaging the civil society and business community in this process of defining the long-term development of Hong Kong. Then there are also various reports by other government agencies, for instance the Environment Bureau, that's another big ministry. Our ministries are called bureaus. They have a blueprint for sustainable resources, so that's also related to the SDGs. And we have a climate action plan, again, a big SDG topic. But when I spoke to the government on this topic, they said here they don't have a central planning agencies for all SDGs. So that is maybe one of the outcomes. So various departments do something, but there is no really, there's a rather weak collaboration between these departments. Maybe what Liam said in the beginning, we have this siloed approach to SDGs, but no platform where all these players could come together. And it was also interesting, this is actually a quote here from the government official. They say, we have taken cognizance of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. So, and I mean, taken cognizance is a rather weak commitment to SDGs. You know? It means we have heard about it, you know, we have taken cognizance. So I found this a bit, not a strong sign of deep commitment. Regarding the institutional arrangements, they also said that they have proposed setting up a high-level steering committee within the government to coordinate the strategic plans. And they're also exploring to use data and figures to have better benchmarks, kind of a dashboard for SDGs. But as of today, it is still, we have proposed. So, and I could not find out whether this proposal has been around for several years, whether this proposal has any chance to be implemented, or what is the status of this proposal. But anyway, it is proposed, which is a good sign, I think. Right? Okay, and on the business side, there's a bit more activity, and particularly in the financial sector, because many of the financial big banks and have CSR departments, and so they have regular meetings. And this is, I don't go into details, but they just have made this assessment from one of the banks, where's Hong Kong in terms of government, community, marketplace, supply chain, and even the workplace. And what I find interesting here is that among the respondents, this was a community event for business, for the business people, and 1 and 2, there was nobody who thought this was an issue in Hong Kong. No? 1 and 2. It means no poverty, no hunger. And also, more critically, I think number 16, which I think, which many of you said, is the most important SDG, because it kind of triggers the whole engagement and how we actually push for SDGs and the institutional governance and so on. There was only one person who thought SDG was important to consider. So that's the business community, and so of course business community has a very much focus on their own issues and maybe not looking at the whole of society issues so much. But just on the SDG 1 is actually quite interesting, because just a couple of weeks ago we had a report that 1 in 5 people in Hong Kong are below the poverty line. You know, that is for Hong Kong. You know, Hong Kong is known as one of the richest city in the Asia Pacific region. We run a budget surplus of 62 billion Hong Kong dollar, which is around, I don't know exactly, about 7.5 billion US dollar, you know. So we have 7.3 million people, and we have a surplus of 7.5 billion US, you know. And then our secretary for Chief Secretary for Administration says that the government tries a lot to combat poverty and admits that there's not much room for the poverty rate to drop significantly in face of the rapidly aging population. I mean, how would you take such a statement? You know, I mean, it's kind of really interesting. And the picture here, there have been a couple of universities doing studies on, you know, this is an 89-year-old woman standing in front of this Louis Vuitton shop here, and they are collecting cardboards. So if you are in Hong Kong, you see many of these old people, mostly women, over 80 years old, and they are collecting cardboards to bring them for recycling. And the price for recycled paper has dropped significantly this year. So they get for 1 kilo 10 US cents. Okay? 10 US cents for 1 kilo. So you can maybe see how much money these people collect. So this is something, of course, that many people think, is this really, and I think there have been some UN people who have told Hong Kong, you know, you really need to do something about SDG number 1. And yeah, okay. So I don't have I cannot unfortunately present you an oversight on all the 17 goals, but when I go back to Hong Kong, I will speak to some of the universities that are planning to do more research on this. But I think to have this ecosystem, what we spoke about before, of Parliament, civil society, business to work together, we still need to do a little bit more. Okay, so to summarize, the status of SDG accountability in Hong Kong, I would say that SDG implementation is very fragmented. There's happening something at all fronts. So civil society is very active. Universities are very active. Some government departments are also active, but they are not coming together. So kind of this goal number 17 on how do we actually collaborate and share and create a platform is quite necessary. There's no systematic approach. There's limited transparency. That means if I ask the government, I'm always surprised that if I ask the government, you get a lot of reports and all kind of interesting things that they have done, but they're not publishing it. So it means it's not very visible, and you don't come across it easily. But if you ask, you can find it. That's good. I mean, at least it is there, but it should be more promoted, of course. And the accountability is not defined because we have not defined any benchmark. And yeah, that's maybe the summary of what I can say. And I think that we have many ingredients in place, but we need more collaboration across the sector. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Ms. Wachok Richard. Suwon Mayor is supposed to be National Assembly because now National Assembly is reserving all the budget, so it should be there. So he told me sorry about that. Okay, yeah, you can share. Okay, now we have some discussions. Even we are late sometimes, but we have more 10 minutes. So, do you have any questions about this presentation? Okay, yeah. Give the microphone.
From the speakers, I have a question for Mr. Chowdhury. You mentioned in your presentation for the formal and informal approaches in oversight relationship, we have the external and oversight institutions. How about the internal setup? Is there any international standard for internal oversight for code of conduct of parliamentary that all parliamentarians has to follow?
Thank you. There is no international code of conduct, but there are certain parliaments who have legislated, and then it is also done through practice and convention. I think what is important is not to have like an overall standard, one size that fits all. You have to look at the country-specific condition, and maybe in certain countries, some institutions are more powerful, more active than others. Also with regard to the informal arrangements, you may have a particularly strong NGO community that works in one country, a strong think tank academia that works in another. But I think what is important is that you need to have a coalition. We talked about partnership as being very important to attaining the SDGs. So I think partnerships also for monitoring the SDGs and holding governments to account is very important.
Okay, I just forgot to invite the keynote speaker, Dr. Agua Joko Pramono. Where is that? Okay, I'm sorry about that. Please hear. Maybe you are very much interested in the National Audit Institute. Yeah, further reviewing sustainable development progress. Okay, the next question. Mariam is very much wondering the level of review, the local level, national level, and regional level, and global level. So how we can make interrelationship each level of reviewing. Is it what you want? Actually.
Yes, indeed. Just you mentioned at the beginning that there are those 3 levels of review in the 2030 agenda, and the national, regional, international. And when the member states were negotiating, it was very clear that the key level is the national level. Because international is when you come and you discuss, you share your experience, you learn from each other. And there is a strong impact at the national level because it can accelerate implementation, lead to an introspection and so on. But accountability was seen to take place at the national level with the parliaments, the supreme audit institutions. So what's interesting indeed is how the two relate to each other, how the parliaments are engaged when the national reviews in the global level are prepared, are the supreme audit institutions engaged in those preparations. And I don't remember if it was you, Mr. Chowdhury, I think it was you saying, for example, that only 25% of the voluntary reviews at global level engaged the parliaments and supreme audit institutions. I don't think it's been very prominent yet. But that was the question, how the two relate to each other.
Okay, we'll have one more question, and then I give each person's about 2 minutes. Okay. Okay. Do you have okay, yeah, Mr. Nam. Yeah.
Thank you. My name is Sang-Min Nam. I'm from UNESCA. Dr. Agus spoke about this auditing, the role of auditing and improving policy and also process. And you also highlighted that changing approaches from whole of government to whole of society. And so this is one element for auditing authorities' role. And then Dr. Chowdhury highlighted the role of oversight and the role of parliament, MPs. And then so, I mean, you have a mutually supporting role, but you have also distinctive roles. So how to really complement each other? I mean, like Korea, the auditing is under the president, not under parliament, but some countries are under parliament. So there are different institutional settings. So I wish to hear your views on complementary role of this auditing and oversight by parliament.
Now, you have a question. Yeah.
I have a question to Mr. Chowdhury, because I was looking at our parliament and I did a search on when the parliament discussed SDGs and I couldn't find anything. So how does the parliament actually, how do you get the discourse into the parliament?
Thank you. Let me also respond to the question that came from the floor. Yes, you're absolutely right. I think each country has its own way of dealing with auditing. In Bangladesh, for example, we have the controller of CAG, who does all of the accounting, and we have the Public Accounts Committee in the Parliament, which actually looks at all of the reports that come through. So I think, and when we talk about oversight, it should not be a technical term. Oversight also means parliamentary hearings. When we did our report, the one that I gave you a summary of, just in 2015, we looked at 80 parliaments, and they had close to 2,200 hearings, public hearings, to look at all these issues. There were about 100 special committees that were formed to look into all of these issues. So I think the the structures are there, the mechanisms are there. It is a question of the Parliament taking leadership, which I think is very important for the SDGs. And there'll be no one size that fits all, as I've said. But even when you have the Supreme Audit Institution, what I mentioned is we have formal networks, and as my colleague from Malaysia asked, we also have informal. So under the formal networking, you have the Supreme Audit Institutions, you have the Ombudsman, you have the national human rights bodies. So I think that is at the formal, at the constitutional, institutional level. And I think each country has to find its own response. And with regard to your question on how do you get this discourse into parliaments, yes, I think raising awareness is of course important. Parliamentarians must be aware of the SDGs. I think we are in far better shape with the SDGs than we were for the MDGs. And you see that even in the voluntary national review, okay, 25% is not a large number, but at least 25% of those reviews have been routed through Parliament. So next time round, we are hoping that this number is going to go up again. And I think that is how you build. You know, you try and create that awareness, then you try and generate momentum. And that is the key that we are following.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Pramono? Yes.
Thank you. I would like to answer the list from Malaysia, is it? Yeah. In our country, that we are not under the parliament and also we are not under the president. So we are working independently. But law said that we have to coordinate with them twice a year. So usually we do it beginning of a year and about the beginning of the second semester. We have communications either with the president and the parliament. We submit our report to them and we discuss the detail of it. And also we have informal communication. Sometimes the parliament asks us to discuss certain matters. Also it's about SDGs. And at the times we try to conduct the audits that fit to the suggestion of the parliaments. And the terms we try to put it in the certain of audit program or audit project specifically for the parliament's needs. And it runs all over the year, all over the years. And at the end of the process, we will have big discussions with the House of Representatives. And we will discuss the following up of the governments had been done and assign what side had been done and also what Parliament has been done about all of the audit matters, include the SDGs. And I would like also to answer the Marian.
Yeah, sure.
Is about how to coordinate national level and regional level. Luckily, we already have the presidential decree for that. We already have the presidential decree and the ministries and the local governments should manage the national action plan and regional action plans. And based on that things, we do conduct the audit models for that, and we will have a communication with them since the beginnings. We communicate them what we seen about the MDGs and we put it to the SDGs programs. And SDGs in the government presidential decree is also include the programs and the budgets and who will lead the certain sector for that. So it is a detailed presidential decree actually. Thank you very much.
Okay. Ms. Ritter, you want 1 minute?
Yes, I have been thinking this morning when Liam presented this silo, how to move from silo to the platform thinking in the government. And I was thinking it's a pity that the British were not ready for this kind of mindset before 1997, because then we would have a similar system. Because Hong Kong is somehow stuck where Britain was in kind of administrative cultures. It is still like 1997, but then add on a little bit of new thinking about administration. So how do we innovate within the government? That is really a very difficult question. and nobody really knows how to deal with this. So how do we go to a whole of society approach? Maybe in countries where you have a weak government, it may be useful to focus on civil society and scholarly community as well as the business community. So maybe they can also nudge a little bit the government to move into a different direction.
Okay, 1 minute.
Yeah, I think the takeaway from this session is that there are already established protocols, established mechanisms for carrying out accountability. I think we can avoid duplication, we should avoid fragmentation, and all of the stakeholders should work respecting those mechanisms already in place. I think, rather than trying to bypass them, rather than trying to set up new forms of accountability. So we have heard today, you have an institution such as the Supreme Audit Institution. You have the mayors who are taking action. You have parliamentarians who are taking action. So accountability has already been practiced at various levels. And I think all of the stakeholders should come together and reinforce these established channels and mechanisms rather than trying to reinvent or rediscover the wheel.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to thank all speakers for the great speeches and insight, and also thank all the audience, your proactive participation. Actually, this session can be extended to next session because this is at the national level review, but next session is a global level review. But if you have any questions or any comments, can be at next session. Thank you. I should wrap up this session. Thank you very much.